Welcome everybody. Before I kick off, I thought what I'd like to do is, James has done a wonderful job and Dominic at introducing themselves. I'd just ask Andy to just do a brief introduction and so everybody knows who he is.
Good morning everybody, I'm Andy Sneed. My daytime job is Head of Design for the MEP part of Langell Construction over in the UK. I'm also President of the Building and Engineering Services Association, which is a AMCA equivalent back in the UK.
Thanks, Andy. You've already heard today from Summit that AMCA has been on a journey for the last 5 years. Well, I've been in Australia now, mainly in SA, for the last 3 years, and really challenging the industry there in their adoption of BIM. And it's certainly been a journey, and without its challenges, without its issues, certainly from the point of view of culture, adoption of new technologies, understanding really what coordination really means, let alone how to spell it, and from the point of view of how the industry moves forward and how they actually make collaboration work. And that's no dissimilar probably to most of you here today. So I'm actually going to bring the conversation back down to the ground roots to actually tackle some of the issues that here locally we have. And we've learned a lot of lessons. The biggest thing we'll be taking away from the NRAR is the lessons learnt on that project. We've already started to adopt them on another project. And therefore we've got a wonderful opportunity here today to actually ask our learned colleagues internationally really what lessons they've learned on certain things. And one of the things I've been involved with very recently is the industry's got itself into a situation where we hear all the time that mandation by the US, by the GCA and the UK is, it's really driving the industry forward. A lot of these things are smoke and mirrors. So I thought I'd ask the question from the point of view that, what is the experience of these guys? Has mandation made that much difference? Or is it still the contractors actually pushing it forward? They're the main drivers of the industry. So James, you touched on it earlier about you still saw that it was contractors actually pushing this forward. I mean, is that the case, or what was the pros and cons for the GSA? How have you seen that actually transform the industry in the US?
We're such a large, fragmented industry in the U.S. that no one can come to any agreement on pretty much anything. So it's the GSA's been pushing some standards. Army Corps has has some standards, but I'd say they've had sort of little impact on a broad scale within the industry. It's been mostly everybody trying to figure it out on their own. Trying to sort of experiment, find value, where's their place, and it's been mostly just ground up, sort of grassroots driven, based on some tangible value. It's interesting to watch because we were following the lead of architects and engineers early on, where they clearly were moving in and taking advantage of the technology for design. What I'd say in the past few years has happened is that we've arguably gotten out ahead even of the designers in some respects, and I think that's a function of both our history and our business model. Our history as a contractor is we never used 2D CAD or any sort of 3D technologies. Versus the designers always had a purpose for the technology, which is producing documents. So that was sort of the fixed reason for using that. Whereas we weren't constrained by that history, so we started embracing it and exploring all its different uses and trying to figure out, okay, what ways can we do that and use BIM and then leverage it. So we've in some ways gotten out ahead in terms of the wider use of it, but again, still it's more on our own initiative than anything because we have a vision around it.
Okay, well, I mean, it's similar to, after various discussions with all the key associations here in Australia, people are prepared to get behind the word encouragement and try and get the Commonwealth and state governments to actually use the word encouragement rather than the mandation. And certainly, even the Productivity Commission, the first draft was more highlighting the fact the industry had to take the lead. But Andy, we had a conversation last night and you had a very strong view on where you saw the UK So I'd like you to just highlight to everybody, you know, your views on that.
How politically correct have got to be?
I'm not politically correct, so don't worry about it.
So the UK. So one of the obvious things that I've realised coming down to Australia for the last week, that some of the issues that you've got down here are exactly the same as the issues that we've got in Europe. When I'm back home, people tell me what a great job some of you guys are doing, and now you're way in front of us. And when I'm down here, people tell me how we're way up in front of you guys. But we've got legislation, so we've won, actually Crown House Technologies, we've won the first government project where they're going to actually enforce the 2016 BIM regulations, and that's a prison that's going to be built in North Wales. So there's a lot of excitement around that right now in the UK.
That isn't just technology, though, is it?
No.
You know, explain just a little bit more about how that's going to deliver the so-called 20% saving.
So, well, don't forget that the whole BIM agenda is written about creating value over the life cycle of a project. When we're in the contracting space, you know, our needs are, I think, very different to what some of the academics are driving. So we have used BIM quite extensively, not just within Lango Rourke, but the wider UK contracting industry to win projects, because great concepts win. That's what clients want to see. They want to see how we can take the MEP form and actually make an architectural impression work. So we've been doing that for some time now, and some of the projects that I'll talk about later on today are examples where we've actually used BIM to drive a concept. But where we then add the values to the detail delivers projects. And that is where I believe that contractors have actually got their own agenda, and we're doing our own things because we can't wait for industry and the academics to make their mind up on which way they're going to go.
Okay. Thank you very much. Dominic, from your perspective, obviously, getting involved in the UK, you know, you mentioned a lot of things about opportunities. Have you seen that at high level, you know, that it's actually driven those opportunities quicker from the adoption? Or what do you see the pros and cons from your perspective?
It's a great question. There's a lot of visibility about what's going on right now with the UK mandate. And I think if you put that into the context of that sits within the government's construction strategy, industrial strategy of construction 2025, that sets the targets for cost and schedule savings. And talking with contractors, a number of them have remarked, you know, yes, it's good. We need to reduce the cost of the public purse on procuring their assets. But at the same time, we're an industry that's on 2% margin. You know, can technology help us essentially burn the candle at both ends? Help us increase our margin, but at the same time reduce our cost. And one thing I would say is I think key to this is the way that assets are procured. So I think that the traditional hard bid type environment isn't as conducive to success for BIM as the way that the government is now setting up for the new mandates, which is more collaborative types of procurement.
Your colleague last night at the dinner last night, Stacey, was quite open about some of the conversations he's had with clients and the fact that they're now, you know, although they're playing their cards quite close to the chest, they're actually now stepping up to the mark. I mean, it was quite, you know, the group of clients that he was now talking to, and that sort of happened very, very quickly. I mean, can you just sort of highlight on that, where you've seen clients now starting to...
Certainly, yeah. Clients moving quickly, clients embracing their supply chain as well, perhaps moving beyond the traditional antagonistic, quite confrontational engagement with the supply chain, seeing quite a bit of that, and also interestingly seeing quite a lot of drive from the private sector back in the UK. People often ask, well, that's okay if the public sector's mandating it, that's 40% of the market, but what does that mean if we're just working in the private sector? And increasingly we're seeing the large private infrastructure and private real estate asset owners looking to the benefits.
And in the UK, they produce their PAS 1192 suite of documents, and in there's quite openly, they state in the employer's information requirements and the asset information model requirements. Is that been widely adopted by clients, or is it still in its infancy?
I'll be honest, I'm probably not the best person to answer that. I'm not close enough to it, But I'd turn it around and say, by 2016, thou shalt do BIM if you are working on a publicly procured project.
Okay.
Hey, Chris, can I actually double back on that? Because I think there's also something we've seen that we've got to watch out for. There's a danger to standards, right? And moving too quickly to those, that they become, as I talked about before in the presentation, there's been a great sort of upswelling of experimentation, trying to explore how do we use BIM, where can we use it, how do we apply it, what's the value? If you start very quickly getting to these standards, it becomes very prescriptive, very narrowing, constraining to that exploration. You start delivering it for the sake of delivering it, because you got a contractual requirement, and you could start to risk missing those other opportunities that don't fit within that contractual.
Yeah, I think the ones that I mentioned are the ones that have been trying to get more of a scope out of the client, actually what they actually want to actually achieve. While you just mentioned a good point there, I was going to ask as well, is what type of contracts have you seen evolving in the US, and have you been involved in any IPD type contracts?
Yeah, IPD, I don't know, there's different flavors of IPD, right? So there's the sort of the three tiers, but the ones that are most known are the ones that sort of an IPD light, where it's not a true multi-party type agreement. Those we have more of we probably have more IPD than most contractors, I think, at this point. Probably a dozen of the sort of true multi-party contracts, and then, I don't know, probably 20, 30 of the sort of light version. Interestingly enough, something we don't often talk about in polite company, but I'll do it anyway. The more successful projects are the ones that are not the multi-party agreements. And it's interesting because it's I think the part of that cause is that it's a little bit of a bridge too far, sort of a radical change. People, sort of cultures have to change to really take advantage of that true multi-party collaborative environment. So the stepping stone is that light version to start to get people to change mindsets, and then moving in the long term maybe to that multi-party. Yeah. But there's definitely there's interest in that, although again I would say it's not a tremendously strong interest, truthfully, in the IPD from the owners. There's some that owners that are knowledgeable and have the expertise to manage that, large institutional or repeat type clients, but the one-off customers, they usually shy away from taking that big leap into the IPD environment. So we certainly try to, as much as we can, encourage the collaboration as whatever way we can, without trying to get too again sort of prescriptive or constraining in a contract form, because sometimes that'll also cause some unintended consequences when you start to put that language into contracts. And I always thought it was funny when IPD started coming out, the true sort of multi-party, it would have contract language like, you will trust your teammates. I'm like, how you try to sue me on that one? I didn't trust him enough. To what extent didn't I trust? I mean, it sort of gets a little funky, that language. So I think that's where people start to get really nervous about that sort of radical leap into that sort of real multi-party environment.
Okay, thanks. Andy, what about yourself? What are the main contracts? How the contracts? What sort of contracts are used in the UK?
I'm yet to come across a project where BIM as a deliverable is contracted to us. What we're seeing more of is certainly in healthcare our energy targets, and we use BIM as a process to help us understand cause and effect of design and changes. But this is where there's a big disconnect. So 2 to 3 years ago, contractors were using BIM as a way of winning work and wowing clients. And I think you have to go back to basics to understand what we're here to do. So where our shift has been is actually using BIM now to actually help us build projects efficiently, create value for clients. We've been using BIM to sequence buildability. We've been doing that for a long time, and that's not through contracts, unfortunately. We've been doing that because it adds value to our clients' business, and it allows us to build safely and efficiently.
Okay, thanks. I mean, the other question, like you just mentioned there about, been doing this for a long time, the transparency that obviously the technology provides to the contracts. So how have you seen the design consultants rise to that challenge, from the point of view of this seamless approach to sharing data and being totally collaborative and delivering an LOD which is coordinated? I hate to say the word. I mean, But from the point of view of where have you seen that the industry's actually adapted, they've actually risen to the challenge? The fact that you're not starting again from scratch. I mean, in the UK, I spent 25 years actually redoing everything when it got to after construction. So what's happening now in the UK? Is it all miraculously all a perfect world?
Is this aimed at somebody else, or is that a question aimed to me? So- Right, okay. I am yet to see a model that has any data in it that comes from a consultant. They don't like me saying that, but that's the reality. Yet to do that. I'm yet to see a model that comes to us that we don't have to re-engineer. Part of that problem is that, comes down to us as well, not being able to articulate actually what we want. And I think that just doesn't sit with us. That sits with lots of different people in the supply chain.
Have you got an equivalent? I mean, I know SIBSI have been trying to bring out their equivalent to BIM MEPOS. I mean, is that something that contractors in the UK are now trying to address?
So what we're doing in the UK through BNES, we've created a BIM forum, very similar to what you guys are doing down here. We're looking to collaborate more with what Summit's doing. I think you're doing some great stuff. In some aspects, you're way in front of us, but I think there's other areas that we can share with you where we're probably running further forward than you guys. But I mean, the SIBS group, we have been involved with the SIBS group, but they are, I suppose, getting bogged down in looking after what COBE means, what that means for the industry. As contractors, we don't particularly care because we want to use this technology to actually deliver projects today. And when these guys decide what COBE looks like, we'll adopt it.
Okay. I mean, one of the challenges that certainly we had in SA is, from the coordination of the services point of view, is a very, very federated industry from the point of, we've got 16 different contractors on one project, all trying to coordinate in parallel, in sequence. On the projects, before I came from the UK, a lot of the 3D coordination that happened for contractors was subbed out. Is that still happening, or the individual trades or yourselves taking more of that on board, bearing in mind you need to rely on that data further downstream? Is that, are you still relying on specific expertise to actually provide that coordinated solution, or are you doing a lot of that in-house? Or
we're doing that in-house. And we're not on our own. A lot of the major contractors are doing it in-house. There's a lot of great capability out there that's capable of doing this.
James, from the point of view of trade unions, since I've been involved in Australia, it's the first time I've come across the discussion and the impact by the trade unions. Do you see any impact in the American industry by trade unions?
Yes.
I was going to now open the questions out to the floor. So has anybody got any questions they want to ask? Something?
Brian.
Going back to your mandating exercise, Brian Welch, going back to your mandating situation, the question that occurs to me is how well clients really felt that facility management and improvements in that asset management and its lifespan is actually going to stimulate them to take a more active course in mandating. Is there any real hard proof that you've come to? I know constructors dominate this conversation, but long-term owners are seeing the benefits that say that they must take this course to maximise their asset value to the longer term.
Use that. Okay. It's disappointing to say, I think all the running at the moment is from contractors. FM providers are starting to show an interest in this, and that's all I see at the moment is an interest. If you'd asked me that question 2 years ago, there'd have been very, very little interest. But a good test of that is how many people here today work in the FM sector. If you just put your hands up, that's 1. 2, 3, 4. So last time I asked that question, I got 1. So things are moving in the right direction, but it's going to be a slow process. I think that they're going to wait and see what we start to produce, aren't they, and see where the value is. That's my own view.
My the same view in the sense that also, no one's proven that additional value. It's not like people aren't managing their buildings now. They obviously have plenty of tools to do that. The question is, how can BIM add additional value, and for what cost? And then when you put those two together, is there an ROI that makes sense? And that's not been proven. I just do, dealing with owners, I'll sort of challenge them a bit sometimes. We have a job right now where we've got an owner on a hospital that's asking for this full Revit MEP model, fabrication level, even though in the US at least, the trades almost always are using 3D CAD, not BIM, true BIM parametric software. So, but the owner wants that, and they want all the information linked to it, documents. They want it full parametric so that they can even see all the CFM, the flow in the mechanical systems, and it's a fairly expensive proposition. It's probably $300,000-$400,000 extra just to produce that model, because again, we're building something that the trade contractors aren't building. And so you sit there and you say, well, I look at that owner and I say, well, okay, $300,000 to $400,000. I would imagine you're expecting there's some additional savings or efficiency that's going to, a multiple of that, 2 to 3 times that. I sit there with that example, and I can't picture how they're going to get $800, $1 million in efficiencies to make that really make sense that they invested that much in this fully detailed parametric, BIM model for FM. In fact, the funny thing is, we were on a call with them, and after all this effort, they said, oh yeah, well we understand that the model's going to be too big for anybody to open up, so we're going to give it to the facilities guys in Navisworks. Which means, they spent all that money to make a smart model, and they just immediately dumbed it down, and they're going to give the facilities guys geometry. And I'm like, wait, what are you doing? I don't get to them, it's they're learning like a lot of owners, and it's more of it's an investment in the future is the theory, right? It's a hedge. Maybe someday the data will be useful, but I don't know. I sort of fast forward, and I just can't seem to make that math work, and I think that's the challenge, is trying to get that to really pay off.
I think it's a really good question, and another test to try and answer it would be there's lots of people in this room that put a lot of time and effort in creating some fantastic models. We're not contracted to do that, but we do it. How many clients ask you for the model at the end of the project? If you put your hand up, anybody where clients asked you? So is that the client, or is that the FM provider?
Well, I got a better question. How many clients know what to do with the model? They ask for it all the time. They just don't. It's like a dog that caught the car. It's like, whoa. You give it to them, and they're like, whoa. What do I do with it now?
But to be fair, that is one of the problems that we're facing, not just with the asset management. A lot of contractors don't know what to do with the model, or subcontractors, but.
I think it's fair to say, I concur with your observation, that it's the contractors that are running with this in the UK. I have seen some notable exceptions with private sector owners, but it's not for the FM perspective. It's involved in what I loosely call optioneering. It's, how can I get a better building design, working with my contractor, design and build contracts to maximise usage, to design the floor space, etc., but not for the FM at this stage, no.
So it's a great concept tool.
It
Absolutely,
is. Yeah.
great concept tool.
Okay, I'm conscious of time. Is there any other questions? Just one.
Yeah, Daniel here, guys. This is probably more for James and Andy, but interested to know from your point of view, 5D BIM, which is always a contentious issue, and especially from what you were saying before, Jim, in your presentation. How have you found the challenges? What are your biggest challenges, and how are you trying to actually overcome those?
It's funny, when I first started in my getting involved in BIM 5-6 years ago, the gentleman who I started working for, the first thing he said is, the only thing I want you to do is figure out how to do BIM for estimating. Don't worry about everything else. That's the one thing I want you to do. And to this day, it's the thing I have not done. and he reminds me of that fairly frequently. And I have all sorts of great excuses, which he does not accept. And the challenge has been, Again, when you look at it from the sense of not just some specialist sitting in a corner taking quantities out of a rabbit model versus rather, it's integrated, it's part of the average estimator's sort of toolkit, they really use it, they're getting it, and they're doing it, they're using BIM more effectively and efficiently than they were doing their work previously. It becomes a bit of a challenge. The estimators, at least I'm sure for everybody, they're always busy. If it's a down economy, you're lump sum bidding work. If it's a good economy, you're negotiating, but you're putting big estimates together. So it's not like they have downtime. We're going to take them offline. We're going to train them for 6 months, and then they go back. So it's always this: do it piecemeal, and then the other challenge is they're by nature a skeptical, untrustworthy bunch. So they don't like black boxes. Like, okay, I put something in here, and I got a quantity out there. They want to know how did that get calculated? Where did that come from? And if they don't understand that or don't trust it, they won't use it. They just won't. The hand takeoff, there's something to that. They clicked here, these 4 corners. I did it. It's this quantity. It makes sense. You give them a model and you hit the button. And truthfully, I wouldn't want them to hit the button. Then what use do they have for us? We want to use their brains for sort of understanding what's in that model and the scope, and sort of, so we've been trying to work more on this idea of interrogating a model, really sort of break it down for the estimators, let them have the tools so that they can take it apart, still understand the scope, get the quantities maybe a little faster, but it's been tough. It's been cultural issues and such. The tools have sort of, only now getting a little bit better, but it's been a tough road so far.
I can add to that. So I'm a bit of a maverick at times, and when you're talking time and cost, it can be an absolute disaster. And I've been there, and when you're presented with a model that there's nothing tangible within it, you waited 6 months for it, it is a really tough place to be. But you've got to go there, and you've got to be brave sometimes and try, and there's an awful amount of learning that comes from this. Time's a lot easier, and we use time for sequencing programs. Cost is really tough, and the answer to the cost is going to come when we've actually got to grips with the data that goes into the model, the accuracy of the data, the quality of the data, and until you get there, I think you've got to forget cost, unless you want to be a maverick and see where you go with it, but it is a tough place.
Okay. Oh, one more. Come on, David.
Thanks, Umit. As a skeptical estimating, old dude, I think I was called before, I just want to, James, you said something that really resonated for me, and I wrote it down. It was BIM as a problem-solving tool. Now, we're talking about cost, and often the position that an estimator is he's asked the question of what is the answer. He seldom turns his mind to what is the problem. And cost is a problem because it's often, here's a design and there's a budget for something else, so that the problem is, how do I provide this facility for the budgeted cost? And I think that's the shift that needs to happen with estimators. It's not about getting an answer, it's actually coming up with solutions to cost problems. And that same sort of concept applies to time, I think. And I think if we can start to encourage that sort of shift, you'll start to see some pretty good engagement, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, that's actually been our focus. Where we have been applying BIM, it's trying to find those areas where it does make sense. You can effectively use it. It tends to be at concepts or schematic, early in design, where our estimators are building the models themselves at a very basic level, understanding massing, understanding setbacks, some of the complexities, getting some of the basic gross square foot quantities that they feed into the estimate. When we get into more of the detailed design development, they're more reliant on the designers. But even then, we are trying to look at BIM as freeing up time to focus on the value add. It's not trying to squeeze, we're not trying to turn estimates around faster. It's more, let the estimator have some more time to think about what are those solutions that maintain this cost within the owner's budget versus showing up 8 weeks later after you've done an estimate and say, oh, by the way, you're over budget by $50 million. And the owner says, well, what are you going to do? And give us more money. That's not an answer. You got to give them solutions, right? And we often get bogged down in the tediousness of just the process. So we're trying to use BIM in a very selective way, free up some time, provide more solutions, even model those. There's the example I had up there of, in my presentation of the 5D estimating was early concept level, structural studies, concrete versus steel, and then different systems and unit cost basis, and try to give owners better information earlier as well using BIM, but very selectively using BIM.
Okay,
Just,
thank
just can I, no, hang on a minute. So just to add to that, and this is fascinating as well. So another story, again, another time where my team said that we can generate an automatic bill of materials out of the model. So I'm thinking that's great, and this is just how fantastic people are in this industry. So. And I'm thinking this is going to be light years ahead of the competition. If we can actually get a model to give me an automatic bill of materials, it's reasonably accurate. Isn't that fantastic? So this is 2 years ago. So I'm presented with this bill of materials that's come out of the model. Actually, what came out of the model was complete garbage. But what the guys had done a manual takeoff, put it into format so it looked like it come out of the model. And it took me 4 months to realise that actually the data hadn't come out of the model. And that is, but again, sometimes we need honest feedback and to say, yeah, this failed dramatically, but it's just the will of people, isn't it, to try and make it work. And these were old dudes as well in my estimating team, and there was a draftsman that was, so desperate and excited by the technology and what this can do and what it can drive if it can make it work. They just wanted it to work, but it didn't work. But again, I thought as a leader that, yeah, we've cracked this.
Fantastic. Fantastic. I think we're going to have to leave it at that. So thanks very much for the people who asked questions, and please show appreciation for the panel.